Don't talk to the old lady, she's just the cleaner." Those words burned through me sharper than a knife. They weren't whispered. They weren't even said in that fake polite voice people sometimes use when they're trying to hide their disdain. No, my daughter-in-law, Melissa, practically spat them at the receptionist, her voice carrying across the marble lobby like a challenge. And to make matters worse, my own son, my Daniel, burst out laughing as if it were the funniest thing he'd heard all week. I stood there, clutching the strap of my old leather purse, watching the receptionist's cheeks flesh. Poor girl. She looked like she wanted the ground to open up and swallow her whole. And me? I just swallowed the sting, like I've done 1,000 times before. But let me back up a little. My name is Dorothy Williams, and I am 73 years old. I was born and raised in Georgia, the eldest daughter of a sharecropper and a school teacher who never let us forget the importance of hard work and dignity. Life never handed me anything on a silver platter. I scrubbed floors, I washed laundry, I picked up other people's trash just to keep food on my own table. And somewhere along the way, through stubborn grit and the grace of God, I built something of my own. What Melissa didn't know, what my son seemed to forget, is that I'm not just the old lady with the purse. I am the owner of the very resort she was standing in, the one she was belittling the staff of like they were dirt beneath her heels. Every inch of that grand lobby, from the chandelier glistening above our heads to the polished tile floors beneath her stilettos, was mine. But I didn't say that. Not then, not yet. Now, don't misunderstand me. I'm not the type who bites her tongue out of weakness. I've got a sharp tongue when I choose to use it, and I've been known to cut a man down to size with nothing but a few words. But sometimes silence speaks louder than any comeback. Sometimes you let people reveal themselves, and my daughter-in-law was revealing herself all too clearly. Melissa married my Daniel about 8 years ago. She was younger than him by nearly a decade, and she had a way of carrying herself like she was owed something from the world. Always dressed like she was going to be discovered on the cover of a magazine, always looking at waiters, drivers, and cashiers like they were beneath her. At first, I thought maybe I was judging too harshly. Sometimes mothers are protective, even suspicious of anyone who comes close to their sons. But over the years, Melissa showed me exactly who she was. Impatient, entitled, and dismissive of anyone who couldn't give her something she wanted. And my Daniel, my sweet boy who I raised to respect every living soul, he laughed along with her. He let her words slide like water, sometimes even encouraged her when she mocked me for being old-fashioned or too frugal. It broke my heart more times than I can count. This trip was supposed to be about family, about togetherness. Daniel insisted we all take a vacation together. Him, Melissa, their little girl, and me. I agreed because I wanted to be close to my granddaughter, and because sometimes a mother will bend herself into all kinds of uncomfortable shapes just to stay in her children's lives. But the second we arrived, I realized I was walking into a test of patience I wasn't sure I'd pass. Standing there in that lobby, watching the receptionist fumble with the check-in papers while Melissa barked at her, I felt heat rise in my chest. Not because Melissa thought I was just the cleaner. Lord knows I've worn that title before, and I wore it with pride. I fed my family with those wages. I bought my first motel with the savings from scrubbing other people's toilets. Being called a cleaner didn't shame me. What stung was the mockery, the way my daughter-in-law used the word as a weapon to demean, to put someone down. And what burned worst was the sound of my Daniel's laugh beside her, loud and careless, as if he'd forgotten everything I'd ever taught him. The receptionist glanced at me then, her eyes wide and apologetic, like she wanted to say something but didn't dare. I gave her the smallest nod, a signal that said, "It's all right, baby. Hold your head high." I wasn't going to let Melissa drag that young woman's spirit down. Not on my watch. But inside, I was already unraveling. When we finally got the room keys and headed upstairs, Melissa chattered on about how these hotels never know how to treat guests properly. She tugged on Daniel's arm, saying, "When we get back home, remind me to leave a terrible review. That'll teach them." He chuckled again, though not as loudly this time, and kissed her cheek like she was the cleverest woman alive. I lagged behind them, my granddaughter's small hand in mine. She looked up at me with her big brown eyes and whispered, "Grandma, why was Mommy so mean to the nice lady at the desk?" My throat tightened. Out of the mouths of babes, the truth always comes. I squeezed her hand gently and said, "Sometimes people forget that kindness doesn't cost a thing, baby. But you remember, no matter who it is, everybody deserves respect." She nodded solemnly like she was tucking the lesson away in her heart. And in that moment, I knew exactly why I was keeping my secret. It wasn't about revenge, though Lord knows Melissa was setting herself up for a fall. It wasn't even about teaching Daniel a lesson, though I prayed he'd open his eyes one day. It was about her, my granddaughter. She needed to see that dignity is stronger than cruelty, that humility outshines arrogance. That night, after we settled into our rooms, I sat on the balcony with a cup of tea and let the sounds of the ocean calm me. 73 years of life had taught me patience, but it had also taught me that storms can brew slowly, silently, until they break open in their own time. Melissa thought she was traveling with a frail old woman. Daniel thought he was just humoring his mother. Neither of them had the faintest idea that the ground beneath their feet, the luxury resort they thought they owned with their presence, was mine. Every chandelier, every polished surface, every ocean view suite carried the weight of my sacrifices and victories, and I intended to let them walk straight into that truth on their own.
If this story is touching something in you, or if you're curious where it's going, do me a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell icon so you don't miss the next chapter. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to know. Melissa wasted no time making her presence felt. From the moment we stepped out of the elevator and into the hallway, she wrinkled her nose like the air itself offended her. "Honestly, Daniel," she muttered loud enough for me to hear, "for what they charge, you'd think they could update the carpets. This feels so dated." She drew out the last word like it had a bad taste in her mouth. I kept my eyes on my granddaughter, who was skipping a little ahead of us, her braids bouncing as she hummed a song only she could hear. Children are blessed like that, able to find joy in the smallest things, untouched by the bitterness of the world. I wished I could live in her lightness, even for a moment. But Melissa's voice, sharp and cutting, kept dragging me back to the heaviness I carried in my chest. Daniel walked beside his wife, nodding absently at her complaints. Every so often he laughed under his breath, the way men do when they're trying to keep peace without truly listening. It broke my heart to see him like that, so passive, so content to let her dictate the tone of every room she entered. He wasn't always that way. Once upon a time, Daniel had fire in him. As a boy, he used to defend classmates who were bullied, step between them and the cruel kids without hesitation. I'd raised him on principles of respect, fairness, and courage. But somewhere along the line, that boy had slipped away, replaced by a man who laughed at cruelty instead of standing against it. We reached our adjoining suites. Melissa clicked her tongue when she opened the door, tossing her purse onto the sofa with theatrical disgust. "It'll do, I guess," she announced, inspecting the room like a queen judging her servant's efforts. "But if I find one speck of dust in here, Daniel, we're getting upgraded. I don't care if it costs more." Daniel smiled faintly, dropping his suitcase by the bed. "Sure, honey, we'll see how it goes." I said nothing. Words hovered at the edge of my tongue, heavy as stones, but I swallowed them back. There's a time for confrontation, and then there's a time for silence. Right now, I wanted Melissa to dig her own hole. The deeper she went, the more powerful the truth would be when it came out. My granddaughter tugged at my hand. "Grandma, can we go to the pool later, please?" Her eyes shined with excitement, untouched by the tension swirling around her parents. "Of course, baby," I said softly, brushing a braid from her forehead. "We'll go swimming after lunch." Melissa groaned. "Swimming already? We've barely unpacked. Besides, I don't even know if I want her in that pool. Who knows what kind of germs are floating around in there?" Daniel chuckled, stretching out on the bed. "Relax, Melissa. It's a resort, not some public pool. It's probably cleaner than our bathtub back home." Melissa shot him a glare sharp enough to slice. "Don't joke about things like that. You know how particular I am." I pressed my lips together. It wasn't just the words, it was the way she said them, the disdain dripping from every syllable, the constant assumption that everything and everyone was beneath her. The staff, the hotel, even her own husband at times. She moved through life as though it owed her something. And Daniel, my boy, he just let her. Later, when we went down to lunch, Melissa's behavior only worsened. She snapped her fingers at the waiter like he was a dog. She sent back her iced tea twice because it wasn't cold enough, though condensation was running down the glass. She wrinkled her nose at the menu and said loud enough for the couple at the next table to hear, "This is the best they can do? I've seen better food at airport lounges." I watched the young waiter's jaw tighten, his polite smile fixed like a mask. My heart ached for him. I'd trained my staff to treat every guest with dignity, no matter how unreasonable. But watching Melissa strip the humanity from these young workers, I wanted to rip that mask off and let him show her exactly what he thought of her. Instead, I leaned forward and said gently, "Melissa, dear, maybe you should try the shrimp and grits. They're a house specialty." Her eyes flicked to me, filled with annoyance. "Oh, please. I'm not about to eat some greasy southern dish. I'll stick to a salad. You know I don't do heavy food." Daniel laughed again, covering his mouth with his napkin. "Babe, you should just let Mom enjoy her old-fashioned food. She grew up on that stuff." The words were meant lightly, but they landed like a slap. Old-fashioned. The way he said it, like my life was nothing more than a dusty relic. He didn't know, or maybe he had forgotten, that those very old-fashioned recipes kept him fed when times were lean, that the same grit that built this menu built the roof over his head. I let the silence linger, staring at my plate, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. But inside, the storm turned hotter. After lunch, I excused myself and wandered the grounds alone. My body may be 73, but my legs still carried me steady and strong. I strolled past the pool, past the manicured lawns, past the gardens I had personally overseen years ago when this was nothing more than a struggling motel I'd saved from bankruptcy. My fingerprints were on every corner of this place, yet here I was, invisible in my own kingdom. Melissa's voice rang in my ears. "She's just the cleaner." She had no idea that the woman she mocked had scrubbed her way up from nothing, had signed the checks that paid the employees she belittled. She had no idea that the world she dismissed with the curl of her lip was mine. That night at dinner, the tension only grew. Melissa complained about the music being too loud, the chairs being too hard, the wine being too dry. Daniel nodded, smiled, laughed at her jokes, and when she made a snide remark about how some people just don't understand luxury, his eye slid briefly to me. It was subtle, but I caught it. He was laughing at me too. My granddaughter noticed the shift. She leaned against me, her little voice barely a whisper. "Grandma, don't be sad. I think you're special." The dam in my chest nearly broke. I kissed her forehead, blinking back the sting of tears.
out of the mouths of babes again, the pure truth, simple and unadorned. Later, alone in my suite, I stood by the window overlooking the ocean. The moonlight shimmered across the waves, calm and steady, and I thought of all the nights I had spent awake, working 2 jobs, saving pennies in jars, praying for enough to keep the lights on. I thought of the motel I bought with nothing but a dream and a backbone. I thought of the years I spent building this empire brick by brick while raising Daniel to be a man who should have known better. And I thought of Melissa dripping venom from her tongue and Daniel laughing beside her. They thought I was just the old lady tagging along, but the truth had a way of rising, like the tide outside my window, and when it came in, it would drown their arrogance in one sweep. I lay down in bed, staring at the ceiling, and whispered a prayer. Lord, grant me patience to hold my tongue and strength to stand tall when the time comes. Let me teach them not through anger, but through truth, and let my granddaughter never forget the lesson. Sleep came slowly, fitful with dreams of laughter echoing in my ears, but beneath it all, a certainty steadied me. The storm was coming, and I was ready.
The next morning started out calm, almost deceptively so. The sun had just begun to filter through the heavy curtains, painting long golden stripes across the carpet. I woke earlier than everyone else, as I always do, and sat in the small armchair near the window with a cup of tea. The ocean was still, the kind of stillness that fools you into thinking the day will be peaceful. But I knew better. I could feel the undercurrent in my bones, that strange knowing that something was brewing. By the time I finished dressing, Daniel was still asleep, and Melissa was fussing in front of the mirror, applying layer after layer of makeup like she was preparing for a photo shoot. She didn't so much as glance at me when I stepped out. My granddaughter was curled up in bed, soft snores slipping from her mouth, her braids undone from the night before. Melissa caught sight of me in the mirror and sighed. "Can you at least take her down to breakfast? I need time to get ready. Honestly, it's exhausting being the only one around here who cares about appearances." I didn't argue. I simply gathered my granddaughter's robe, slipped it over her small shoulders, and led her gently by the hand. She rubbed her eyes sleepily, leaning against me as we made our way down to the lobby. The moment the elevator doors opened, I was greeted by the murmur of voices, the clink of dishes, the low hum of activity. Guests were moving in and out of the restaurant area, staff greeting them with the practiced warmth I had taught them years ago. Everything seemed normal, as it should be. We took a seat near the corner, away from the bustle. I ordered my granddaughter pancakes and fruit, tea for myself. For a few precious minutes, it was just us. Her swinging her legs beneath the chair, chattering about the pool, me smiling and nodding, trying to soak up the joy in her voice. And then, Melissa arrived. She came sweeping into the room like she owned it, hips swaying, heels clicking against the tile. Daniel trailed behind her, looking half asleep, but smiling indulgently as if every step deserved applause. She scanned the room, her eyes immediately finding me, and her lips curved into a tight smile. "There you are," she said, as though I'd gone missing on purpose. "We're supposed to be checking out the spa packages this morning. Didn't you hear me say that last night?" "I heard," I replied evenly. "But I thought breakfast for the little one came first." Melissa rolled her eyes, muttering something under her breath about priorities, before snapping her fingers at a waiter. The young man hurried over, polite and efficient, though I saw the way his jaw tightened. She had that effect on people. "2 lattes, extra hot, and a croissant for me. Make sure the butter is served on the side, not melted. I hate it when it's greasy. Oh, and don't take too long." The waiter nodded and hurried off. Daniel chuckled softly as if she had just told the most charming joke. I sat there quietly, feeling my granddaughter shrink against me at her mother's sharp tone. My fingers tightened around my teacup, the porcelain warming my skin. Every instinct in me wanted to tell Melissa to lower her voice, to treat people with dignity, but I held my tongue. It was only later, when we approached the front desk, that everything came to a head. We needed to confirm the spa appointments Melissa had been so insistent about. The receptionist that morning was a sweet young woman named Carla. I knew her family. I'd hired her myself 2 years ago after she graduated from college. She had a bright smile and a steady presence, though as Melissa approached, I saw her confidence falter. "Good morning," Carla began warmly. "How can I help you today?" Melissa leaned on the counter, tapping her nails against the polished wood. "We have spa appointments booked under the name Daniels. Double-check them for me, will you?" Carla typed quickly, then nodded. "Yes, I see them here. You're all set for 11 o'clock. Melissa gave a curt nod. "Good, and make sure they're on time. I don't tolerate delays." I felt a pang of embarrassment on her behalf, but I stayed quiet, my granddaughter still holding my hand. Carla glanced at me then, recognition flickering in her eyes. Her smile softened as she said, "Good morning, Mrs. Williams." Before I could respond, Melissa straightened, her head whipping toward the girl. Her voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "Excuse me? Don't talk to the old lady. She's just the cleaning lady. Focus on my appointments." The words echoed in the lobby, bouncing off the marble floors and high ceilings. Heads turned. Guests paused mid-conversation. Even the bellboy froze where he stood, his eyes widening in shock. I felt the world tilt. My chest tightened, not from shame, never shame, but from the sheer cruelty dripping from her tongue. And then came the sound that pierced me deeper than her words. Daniel's laugh, loud, careless, ringing out for everyone to hear. He laughed like it was a comedy show, like the humiliation of his own mother was entertainment. Carla's face flushed crimson. Her fingers stilled on the keyboard. She looked at me with horror in her eyes, like she wanted to disappear. I stood there steadying myself against the weight of it all. My granddaughter looked up at me, confusion clouding her sweet face. "Mommy, why did you say that?" she asked softly, her small voice trembling. Melissa ignored her, flipping her hair back. "Honestly, these places need to train their staff better. Chit-chatting with the cleaning crew in front of guests, completely unprofessional." My lips parted, 100 retorts battling to be spoken. I could have told her yes. I had been a cleaner once, and I was proud of it. Those long years of scrubbing floors built the foundation of everything she now strut through without gratitude. I could have told her that she stood in my house, under my roof, living a luxury bought with the very labor she mocked. I could have told Daniel that his laughter cut deeper than any insult Melissa could ever hurl. But I didn't say any of it, not then. Instead, I drew a deep breath, placed my hand gently on Carla's, and said, "It's all right, sweetheart. You're doing just fine." My voice was calm, steady, even though my insides were burning. Carla nodded quickly, blinking back tears, and returned to the computer. Melissa rolled her eyes again, muttering about standards, as she gathered her purse and tugged Daniel away. I lingered behind, letting the lobby clear a bit. My granddaughter tugged at my skirt, her eyes wide and searching. "Grandma, are you really a cleaner?" I crouched down so we were eye to eye, brushing her cheek with my hand. "Baby, I was, and I was proud of it. Work is never something to be ashamed of." She nodded slowly, the lesson etching itself into her young mind. When I stood again, I caught sight of Carla wiping her eyes discreetly. I wanted to comfort her more, to tell her not to let women like Melissa define her worth. But I knew my time would come. The truth would speak louder than any whispered reassurance. As I walked back towards the elevators, Daniel's laughter still echoed in my ears. That, more than Melissa's words, cut me down to the quick. A mother raises her son, sacrifices her dreams, bleeds and sweats to build his future. And he stands beside a woman who mocks her, laughing like it's a joke. I pressed the elevator button, my hand trembling. My reflection stared back at me in the polished doors. An old woman, yes, but not defeated.
My eyes still burned with the fire of the girl who had scrubbed her way out of poverty, who had turned pennies into an empire. They thought I was nothing. They thought I was small. But they had no idea. And one day soon, they were going to learn exactly who Dorothy Williams really was.
When I closed the door to my suite that afternoon, I finally let my shoulders sag. I'd held myself together in that lobby in front of Melissa's venom and Daniel's laughter, but the moment I was alone, the strength that had carried me trembled. The walls felt too close, the silence too heavy, like the very air wanted me to break. I set my purse down carefully on the table, pulled off my shoes, and sat on the edge of the bed. My hands shook as I rubbed them together, trying to calm the storm inside me. I had known Melissa could be cruel. I had seen her sharp tongue slice waiters, cashiers, and even neighbors without a second thought. But hearing her aim it at me in front of strangers, that was something else. And Daniel laughing beside her, that pierced me to the bone. My son, the boy I carried for 9 long months through back-breaking days and sleepless nights, the child I nursed with cracked hands after scrubbing other people's bathrooms for pennies, the boy whose shoes I patched over and over so he'd never feel the sting of want the way I did. My Daniel. He had once clung to me like I was the whole world. Now, he couldn't even be bothered to defend me. He had stood there, watching his wife humiliate me, and he laughed. I pressed a hand over my chest, feeling the weight of that truth crush against me. How many times had I bent myself to shield him? How many nights had I gone without so he could have more? And this was the return? Mockery, laughter, silence when my dignity was on the line? I closed my eyes, and memories came flooding in uninvited. I was 20 years old again, standing in a stranger's kitchen, scrubbing grease from a skillet so caked with soot it looked like it hadn't been cleaned in years. My fingers were raw, my knees aching from hours of scrubbing. I remember the woman of the house tossing her leftover scraps in the trash, food enough to feed a family, and telling me I could take a little bag if I needed it. I did need it. I took it home to Daniel, still a toddler then, who clapped his hands in delight when I warmed the chicken bones and rice she'd thrown away. That smile made every ache in my body worth it. Another memory. Me standing in the cold, waiting for the bus to take me across town for my second job. My coat was thin, barely keeping the chill off, but Daniel was warm at home under blankets because I refused to let him freeze. I remember counting out change, pennies and nickels to buy him milk. The grocer gave me a pitying look, and I stood tall, refusing to let my pride crack, even though my eyes stung. And then later, years later, the day I signed the papers for my first motel, I'd saved every dime, scrimped and scraped until I had enough for the down payment. The bank officer looked at me like I was crazy, a black woman with calloused hands daring to own property. But I walked out with the keys, and I remember holding Daniel in front of that shabby building, telling him, "This is ours. One day, you'll be proud of me." His little arms wrapped around my neck, his voice piping with excitement. "I already am, Mama." Where had that boy gone? Where had that love gone? I opened my eyes, tears slipping down my cheeks before I even realized they'd formed. I wiped them away quickly, almost angrily. Crying never solved a thing. Crying didn't pay bills. Crying didn't build businesses. Crying didn't demand respect. I had spent my life being strong, being steady, being the one everyone leaned on. But sitting there in that room, with the sound of Daniel's laugh replaying in my mind, I felt a crack split through me. I stood and walked to the balcony. The ocean stretched out endless and blue, waves folding into one another, unstoppable, eternal. I gripped the railing, letting the salt air sting my face. Out there, the water didn't care who I was, didn't care if Melissa thought I was a cleaner, didn't care if Daniel forgot what I'd done for him.
The ocean just kept moving, indifferent and steady. I envied it. The knock on the adjoining door broke my thoughts. My granddaughter's little voice called softly, "Grandma, can I come in?" I opened the door and pulled her into my arms. She smelled like sunshine and syrup from breakfast, her small body warm against mine. She looked up at me, concern wrinkling her little brow. "Are you sad?" Children see straight through you. They always do. I forced a smile, smoothing her hair. "I'm all right, baby, just tired." She studied me for a moment, then whispered, "Mommy was mean to you. I don't like it when she's mean." My throat closed up, out of the mouths of babes. I kissed her forehead. "You remember what I told you? Everyone deserves respect, no matter who they are." She nodded solemnly. "Even cleaners?" "Especially cleaners," I said firmly, "because they work hard. They deserve the same kindness as anyone else. You never forget that, all right?" Her little arms squeezed my neck. "I won't forget." I held her close, breathing her in, feeling strength seep back into me. This was why I endured. This was why I bit my tongue when every part of me wanted to lash out. Because she was watching. She was learning. And I refused to let Melissa's cruelty shape her view of the world. When she left to go back to her room, I sat again, staring at the floor, thinking about everything I'd carried. At 73, I should have been enjoying peace, basking in the pride of what I built. Instead, I was here, disrespected by the very family I'd sacrificed for. But maybe this was the lesson life still had for me. To stand tall not because people gave me respect, but because I demanded it by the way I carried myself. I wouldn't lower myself to Melissa's level. I wouldn't scream or fight or beg for Daniel to see me. No. I would let the truth speak for itself. I thought of the staff, the receptionist, the waiters, the bellboy, all of them who knew who I was, who respected me, who were forced to swallow Melissa's cruelty because they didn't want to lose their jobs. They deserved better, and in time, they would get it. I thought of Melissa, strutting around like a queen in borrowed clothes, blind to the fact that every inch of this place bore my name. She thought she was looking down on me, but she was standing in my shadow. And I thought of Daniel, my son, my heart, the boy I once thought would carry my lessons into the world. He was lost now, swallowed up in Melissa's arrogance, blinded by her charm or his own weakness. But maybe, just maybe, when the truth came to light, he would remember. The hurt still pressed heavy on my chest, but beneath it, a resolute hardened. Let them laugh. Let them mock. Let them think I was small. The day would come when they would have no choice but to see me for who I truly was. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, tears drying on my cheeks. My mind drifted through every sacrifice, every scar, every late night and early morning, all the pieces of my life that had built this empire brick by brick. Melissa thought she had cut me down. Daniel thought his laughter had silenced me. But I had lived too long, survived too much, to be undone by their cruelty. They didn't know it yet, but the storm was building, and when it broke, it would wash away every illusion they had about me. I closed my eyes, whispering a prayer into the dark. Lord, don't let my pain be wasted. Let my silence teach louder than my anger ever could. Let them learn, and let my granddaughter grow up knowing her grandmother was never small. Sleep finally came, heavy and dreamless. But even in my rest, I carried the weight of the truth waiting to be told.
The next morning, I woke to the sound of the ocean against the rocks, steady and unbothered. I envied the waves again, how they never faltered, never wavered, just kept moving no matter what storm blew through. I sat up slowly, my bones stiff, my heart heavier than I wanted to admit. The memory of Melissa's sharp words in the lobby clung to me, still echoing. But so did the image of my son laughing. That laughter cut deeper than her insult. I dressed and made my way downstairs, walking slowly through the halls of the hotel I had poured decades of my life into. Every painting on the wall, every polished tile on the floor, every smiling staff member moving briskly in their uniforms, they were all pieces of me. I had scrubbed, saved, and built until these walls could stand on their own. And yet here I was, treated like I was invisible. When I stepped into the staff corridor, they froze for a moment, whispering quiet "Good morning, Mrs. Williams," before glancing nervously at each other. They weren't supposed to address me as Mrs. Williams when guests were around. It was one of my rules. But here, in the back corridors, there was no need to pretend. The first to speak was Lydia, the receptionist Melissa had snapped at. She looked furious, her lips pressed thin, her eyes flashing with a protective kind of anger I knew all too well. "Mrs. Williams," she said softly, careful but intense, "with all due respect, I can't let her talk to you like that again. If she says one more thing, I'm going to set her straight. I don't care if she's your daughter-in-law or not." Behind her, Jacob, the bellboy, nodded. His jaw was tight. "It's not right, ma'am. We all know who you are. We all know what you've done. For her to treat you like that? No, I won't stand by." One by one, others chimed in. The wait staff, the cleaners, even the night manager who usually kept quiet. Their voices carried anger, but underneath that anger was love, loyalty. They weren't just staff. They were family in the truest sense of the word. People who had stood by me, worked alongside me, grown under my guidance. For a moment, their words almost undid me. To be defended so fiercely, it reminded me I wasn't alone. But it also scared me, because if they acted on their anger, if they lashed out at Melissa, it would turn ugly fast. Melissa would use it to paint herself the victim. Daniel would laugh it off, and the story of what happened would twist into something far from the truth. I lifted a hand gently, steadying them the way I used to when Daniel was little and about to throw a tantrum. My voice was calm, but I made sure it carried weight. "No," I said. "Not a word, not a glance, not a raised voice." "But Mrs. Williams," Lydia began, her face flushing red. I shook my head. "I mean it. I will not have my staff dragged down to her level. You all represent me. You represent this place. We don't fight pettiness with pettiness. We don't dirty our dignity just because someone else wants to drag it through the mud." Jacob looked like he wanted to argue, his fists clenched at his sides, but I stepped closer and placed a hand on his shoulder. His youth was boiling in him, the same way Daniel's once had, the way I once carried fire in my chest when I was young and ready to fight anyone who crossed me. I built this hotel with more than money. I built it with discipline, with grace, with the belief that no matter what, we hold ourselves higher. Melissa doesn't get to decide how we act. I do, and I say we act with dignity. There was silence, heavy and reluctant, but silence all the same. I saw the struggle in their faces. They wanted to protect me, they wanted to defend me, but they trusted me, and I knew they would obey. Lydia swallowed hard, blinking back tears. It hurts to watch. She doesn't deserve to breathe the same air as you, ma'am." Her words shook me because they mirrored my own feelings, the bitterness I tried not to let show. I pulled in a deep breath and softened my tone. "I appreciate your hearts, more than you'll ever know. But this isn't about her. It's about us, about who we are, about what kind of example we set. One day, she will learn, but it won't be because we shouted her down. It will be because the truth speaks for itself." Their heads bowed slightly, some nodding, others still stiff with frustration. But they listened. They always did. And that, more than anything, told me I had done something right with my life. After they dispersed, I stayed in the quiet corridor for a long moment, leaning against the wall. My chest felt tight again, but this time not from humiliation, but from the weight of carrying everyone's expectations. They saw me as strong, unshakable, untouchable. But I was human. I bled inside, even when I didn't show it. Later that afternoon, I crossed paths with Melissa again. She didn't know what had been brewing among the staff, how close she had come to being torn apart by their words. She floated into the lobby with Daniel trailing behind her, her sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. "Oh," she said loudly, when she spotted me, her voice dripping with false surprise. "There's the cleaner. Did you finish scrubbing the toilets, Dorothy, or are you on break?" The guests in the lobby shifted uncomfortably, some glancing between us, others pretending not to hear. Daniel chuckled beside her, shaking his head like it was all some harmless joke. I looked at her, steady, unmoving. I felt the sting, yes, but I let it wash over me like the ocean's waves. Then I smiled, soft and patient, the way you smile at a child throwing a tantrum in public. "I've done my work," I said calmly, "and I do it well. That's enough for me." Her mouth twisted, caught off guard by my lack of reaction. She wanted me angry. She wanted me humiliated. But all she got was my grace. I walked past them without another word, and though I didn't see it, I could feel the eyes of every staff member in that room watching me. They saw me hold my ground. They saw me stay composed. And I knew in that moment I'd given them the example they needed. Later, back in my suite, I let the tears come again. Quiet, steady tears. Because even when you rise above, it still hurts to be stepped on. It still hurts when your own child refuses to shield you. But as I wiped my face, I whispered the words that had carried me through decades of struggle. Dignity first. Always dignity first.
Dinner that night was supposed to be a family moment. At least, that's what I told myself as I dressed. I put on a soft blue dress I'd worn to church years ago. Something simple, something dignified. I combed my silver hair back and fastened my small pearl earrings. They weren't expensive pearls, nothing like the kind Melissa flaunted, but they were mine, bought with my own hard-earned money, and I wore them with quiet pride. When I walked into the restaurant, the staff straightened like soldiers at attention. Their eyes flicked to me and then back to their duties, each one acknowledging me with the smallest nod, their loyalty burning like an invisible thread holding me up. I nodded back, silently thanking them for their strength. Melissa was already seated, Daniel beside her. She wore a dress that looked like it had come straight from a glossy magazine, her nails long and painted sharp red. She waved to the waiter impatiently, her voice just loud enough for the whole restaurant to hear. "Excuse me, can we get some decent service here? We've been waiting forever." I knew they had only been seated for 5 minutes. I could see the sweat bead on the waiter's forehead as he rushed to her side. He was young, maybe 19, and he glanced at me nervously before plastering on a polite smile. She leaned in toward him, her tone dripping with disdain. "And don't bring us anything that looks like it's been sitting under a heat lamp. I don't eat garbage." Daniel chuckled. The sound hit me like a slap. He found her cruelty entertaining. He always did. I sat down quietly across from them, my granddaughter sliding into the chair next to me. She grabbed my hand under the table, her small fingers wrapping tightly around mine. It gave me courage. The meal began awkwardly, with Melissa making complaints about everything. The menu was too limited, the water was too warm, the bread rolls were too dry. Every word out of her mouth was a complaint, and every complaint was meant to remind everyone around her that she believed she deserved more. Finally, the food arrived, perfectly plated, steaming fresh. I knew this kitchen. I had eaten its meals more times than I could count. The food here was good, better than good. But Melissa sniffed her plate like a spoiled child and wrinkled her nose. "Ugh," she said loudly. "Do they think I'm going to eat this? Honestly, Dorothy, you probably don't know the difference, but this is not 5-star food." Her words landed like stones in my chest. My granddaughter looked up at me, eyes wide, waiting to see how I'd respond.
I forced a smile, gentle, steady. It looks fine to me. Food is food, and I'm grateful for it. Melissa smirked, tilting her head. Of course you'd say that. You've probably eaten worse while cleaning toilets. The knife in my hand trembled against the plate. For a moment, I thought my resolve might shatter. The restaurant fell into a strange hush, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Daniel burst out laughing, smacking the table. "Melissa, you're terrible," he said between chuckles. But there was no disapproval in his tone, only admiration. My granddaughter's grip on my hand tightened. I looked down at her, saw the confusion, the hurt in her small face. She didn't understand why her mother would say such a thing. She didn't understand why her father would laugh. And in that instant, I realized this wasn't just about me anymore. Melissa's poison was seeping into the next generation, dripping into the heart of an innocent child. I swallowed hard, holding my granddaughter's gaze. "We don't talk like that," I said softly, more to her than to anyone else. "People who work hard deserve respect. Always." Melissa rolled her eyes, stabbing at her food with her fork. "Oh, here we go with the lectures again. Honestly, Dorothy, you're exhausting. Always preaching about respect, dignity, hard work. If you had really worked that hard, maybe you'd actually have something to show for it. But instead, you're just..." She stopped herself, smirking as though savoring the cruelty she hadn't yet spoken. My chest ached. My mind flashed back to all the nights I had come home with my fingers raw, my back bent, my spirit tired, but unbroken. The motels I scrubbed until the smell of bleach lived in my hair. The long days spent counting pennies just to keep the lights on. And then later, the endless hours building, managing, expanding this very resort she now disdained. Something inside me broke then, not in weakness, but in clarity. I saw Melissa for what she was. I saw Daniel, too. And most of all, I saw my granddaughter's little face absorbing every word, every insult, every response. "Stop it, Mommy," she whispered suddenly, her small voice trembling. "Stop being mean to my grandma." The table went silent. Melissa's head snapped toward her daughter, eyes narrowing. "Excuse me, what did you say?" The girl shrank back, her hand still clutching mine. Her voice quavered, but she repeated it, braver this time. "Stop being mean to my grandma. She didn't do anything to you." Daniel shifted uncomfortably, his laughter dying in his throat. Melissa's lips curled into a smile that chilled me. "Oh, sweetie," she said in a mockingly sweet tone. "You just don't understand. Your grandma is used to this. She's tough. Aren't you, Dorothy?" She turned to me, daring me to deny it. I looked at her, then at Daniel, back at my granddaughter, and for the first time, I didn't hide the pain in my eyes. I let it show. I let the hurt sit there, raw and visible. "Yes," I said quietly, "I am tough. But being tough doesn't mean you deserve cruelty. It doesn't mean it doesn't hurt." My granddaughter leaned into me, her head pressing against my arm. I wrapped my other hand around her, shielding her as best I could from the venom across the table. Melissa scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Oh, please, you're being dramatic. Honestly, if you can't take a little joke, maybe you shouldn't be here." The weight of her words hung in the air, sharp and heavy. I saw Daniel's eyes flicker with something, maybe even guilt, but he said nothing. He just looked down at his plate and kept eating. That silence hurt worse than Melissa's words. I ate little that night. The food tasted like ashes in my mouth, but I stayed seated, stayed steady, because I refused to let Melissa think she had driven me away. My granddaughter stayed close, her little body pressed against mine like she was trying to shield me. That thought both warmed me and broke me all over again. A child shouldn't have to defend her grandmother. When the meal ended, Melissa rose dramatically, tossing her napkin on the table. "Well, that was a disaster. I think I need a drink just to wash this down." She strutted away, Daniel following without so much as a glance in my direction. It was only when they were gone that my granddaughter whispered, "Grandma, "Why does Mommy hate you?" The question shattered me. Tears filled my eyes, but I held them back, forcing myself to stay composed for her sake. I bent down, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "She doesn't hate me," I lied softly. "She just doesn't understand me. And sometimes, when people don't understand, they act mean. But we don't act like that, do we?" She shook her head fiercely. "No, we don't." I hugged her tight, holding her as though she were the only anchor left in my world. And maybe she was, because in that moment, I knew. Whatever lesson Melissa thought she was teaching, whatever laughter Daniel thought excused his silence, my granddaughter was learning from me, from the way I endured, from the way I carried myself, from the dignity I refused to surrender. And I swore then and there she would never forget it. That night, alone in my room, I let the tears come freely. I sobbed into my pillow, shaking from decades of buried hurt. But beneath the sorrow, another feeling burned: resolve. The storm was almost here. Melissa's cruelty had pushed too far. Her poison had touched my granddaughter, and I could no longer remain only silent. The time was coming when the truth would be laid bare, and when it did, there would be no laughter left.
The invitation came the next morning, slid under the door of my suite in a cream-colored envelope. My name was written in elegant script, Mrs. Dorothy Williams. I smiled when I saw it. I had known this day was coming, but seeing it spelled out, formal and deliberate, made my pulse quicken. Inside, the letter read, "You are cordially invited to a private dinner with the hotel owner this evening at 7 o'clock. Melissa and Daniel received the same invitation, though, of course, they didn't know I had been invited too. I overheard them in the hallway, their voices carrying through the thin walls of the suite. "Can you believe it?" Melissa gushed, her tone gleeful. "The owner wants to meet us! Us! Finally, someone important recognizes who we are." Daniel chuckled. "Yeah, it'll be good for us. Maybe he's one of those billionaire types looking to expand. Who knows what opportunities could come from this?" "Exactly," Melissa purred. "And when we impress him, he'll see we're the kind of people worth knowing. I'll wear my new dress tonight, the red one. Men always pay attention when I wear red." I pressed my hand to my mouth to stop the bitter laugh rising in my throat. They had no idea the person they thought was a cleaner was the one who had built every stone of this place. No idea the meeting they were preening for would change everything. All day, Melissa strutted around the resort like a peacock, snapping at the staff even more than usual. I caught her telling a housekeeper to refluff the pillows in her room properly, her voice cutting like glass. She criticized the pool water for being too cold, complained about the towels being too stiff, and even sneered at the floral arrangements in the lobby. Every insult burned in my chest, but I kept my composure. I walked through the halls with calm steps, nodding at the staff who looked at me with barely concealed anticipation. They knew tonight would be the night. They had been waiting for it as much as I had. At precisely 7, I dressed in my best. Not the pearls from church, not the blue dress I'd worn before. Tonight, I wore a black gown that fit me perfectly, elegant without being loud. A strand of white pearls lay across my collarbone, shining softly under the light. My hair was swept up, my makeup minimal but sharp. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see the woman Melissa mocked as a cleaner. I saw Dorothy Williams, the owner, the builder, the woman who had clawed her way up from nothing. The private dining room was set with a long mahogany table gleaming beneath a chandelier. Golden light glowed across crystal glasses and polished silverware. Staff stood discreetly along the walls, their eyes flicking to me with quiet pride as I entered. Melissa and Daniel were already seated at the far end, glasses of wine in hand. Melissa wore the red dress she'd boasted about,
her lipstick painted to match. She leaned into Daniel, whispering something that made him chuckle. They hadn't noticed me yet. The maitre d' cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced formally, "it is my honor to present Mrs. Dorothy Williams, the owner of this establishment." The words landed like a thunderclap. Melissa's head whipped around, her painted lips parting in disbelief. Daniel's glass froze halfway to his mouth. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then Daniel set the glass down too quickly, the stem clinking against the table. I walked slowly toward them, each step deliberate, steady. My heels clicked against the marble floor, the sound echoing in the charged silence. I could feel every eye in the room on me. Melissa's face twisted between shock and confusion, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. I stopped at the head of the table and looked directly at them. "Good evening." My voice was calm, smooth, but it carried the weight of every insult, every laugh, every humiliation I had endured. Melissa recovered first, though poorly. She forced a laugh, high-pitched and brittle. "Wait, what? You? You're the owner?" I tilted my head. "Yes, I am Dorothy Williams. I built this hotel from the ground up. Every wall you've walked past, every room you've slept in, every meal you've eaten, it all bears my name." The color drained from her face, though she tried to cover it with a sneer. Well, you should have said something. How are we supposed to know?" Daniel finally found his voice, though it wavered. "Mom, why didn't you tell me?" I turned to him, my heart aching, but my resolve unshaken. "Because I wanted to see who you truly were when you thought I was no one. And now I know." The words hung between us like a blade. Melissa shifted uncomfortably, her hand gripping Daniel's arm as though begging him to speak, to fix what she could not. But he stayed silent, staring at me with something like shame flickering in his eyes. I lowered myself into the chair at the head of the table. The staff moved smoothly, pouring wine into my glass first before serving anyone else. Melissa's eyes widened at the deference, her mouth tightening. She wasn't used to being anything less than center stage. I took a sip of the wine, letting the silence stretch until it nearly suffocated them. Then I set the glass down gently and leaned forward. "Respect," I said softly. "It costs nothing, and yet it reveals everything. You showed me who you are, and I will not forget it." Melissa opened her mouth to argue, but Daniel stopped her with a hand on her wrist. His face was pale. "Mom, Don't," I cut in sharply. "Don't make excuses. Don't pretend you didn't laugh while she mocked me. Don't pretend you didn't stand by while she humiliated me in front of strangers. I was willing to endure her cruelty, but your silence? That was the deepest wound." His eyes filled with something. Guilt, regret, maybe even fear. He looked down at his plate, unable to meet my gaze. Melissa bristled, her pride refusing to bend. "You're overreacting. So what if I made a joke or two? You're tough. You can take it. Honestly, this whole act is ridiculous. Just because you own this place doesn't mean—" "Enough," I said, my voice sharp enough to slice the air. She froze, stunned into silence. The staff along the walls stood straighter, pride radiating from their faces. They had waited so long to hear me say that word. "You may not respect me, but you will respect what I've built. This hotel stands because of the sacrifices I made, sacrifices you could never begin to understand. Every worker you sneered at, every server you insulted, they are my family, and you will not treat them or me like garbage." Melissa's face turned red, her mouth opening and closing without words. Daniel sat frozen, caught between his wife's pride and his mother's truth. I leaned back, my eyes never leaving them. Tonight was meant to be a dinner of honor, but instead, it has become a lesson. Respect is not optional, it is the foundation of everything. Without it, you have nothing. The room was silent, but for the clink of glasses and the soft shuffle of staff serving dishes. Melissa didn't speak again, though I could see her fuming, her pride cracking under the weight of her humiliation. Daniel didn't look at me once. As the meal went on, I carried myself with calm dignity, each word, each gesture reminding them of the power they had underestimated. The staff moved around me with reverence, each action amplifying the truth Melissa had tried so hard to deny. When dessert was served, I rose from my chair. This dinner is over. Melissa stood abruptly, her voice shrill. You can't just... I can, I said, cutting her off, and I have. You are free to leave. But remember this moment. Remember how it feels to be put in your place, because respect is earned, not demanded. And tonight, you earned nothing. Daniel rose slowly, his face pale and his shoulders heavy. He opened his mouth, but no words came. For once, Melissa had no comeback. I turned and walked away, my head high, my heart pounding but steady. Behind me, I could hear the murmur of the staff, their quiet satisfaction humming like a hymn. The storm had broken, and they would never look at me the same way again.
The morning after the dinner felt different. The air itself seemed sharper, clearer, like the storm had passed, but left the world rearranged. I woke early, as I always did, my body carrying the rhythm of years of hard work. But instead of moving about quietly, slipping into corners, I opened my curtains wide and let the sun pour in. Today wasn't about hiding. Today was about standing, fully in the light I had earned. Word of what happened spread through the hotel like wildfire. I could see it in the way the staff looked at me when I walked through the halls. Admiration, respect, a quiet solidarity that warmed my chest. Guests whispered too, heads turning, eyes following me, though most were polite enough not to stare openly. Melissa's shrill voice from the night before had carried farther than she realized. People had seen her humiliated, and they had seen me claim my place. But my son, my Daniel, his face haunted me. The shame in his eyes, the silence on his lips. I couldn't shake it, no matter how proud I felt of finally standing tall. He was my boy, my only child, and I had raised him to know better. Hadn't I? Or had I failed him without realizing it? By mid-morning, I received a message at the front desk. Melissa and Daniel wanted to see me privately. I knew I would have to face them sooner or later, but still my stomach tightened as I read it. I agreed to meet them in one of the smaller lounges, a quiet space with soft chairs and a wide window overlooking the ocean. When I walked in, Melissa was perched on the edge of a chair, her red dress from the night before replaced with something pale and soft, almost innocent. But no amount of fabric could soften the sharpness of her eyes. Daniel sat beside her, shoulders slumped, his face drawn. Melissa jumped up as soon as she saw me. "Dorothy," she said, her voice dripping with sweetness that made my skin crawl. "We need to talk about last night, about everything." I didn't sit right away. I wanted them to feel my presence, to feel that this was my space, my choice. Finally, I lowered myself into a chair opposite them, folding my hands in my lap. Melissa leaned forward, her smile forced. "Look, I admit I might have overstepped. Maybe I was a little harsh, but it was all in good fun. I didn't know who you were, If I had known, of course I would have treated you differently. That, I said quietly, is exactly the problem. Her smile faltered, but she pushed on. I just mean, you can't expect people to treat cleaners or staff the same as the owner. It's not realistic. People respect power. That's just the way the world works. I felt the heat rise in my chest. So respect only matters when someone has money? A title? Melissa, respect is for every soul, not just the one sitting at the top. You're twisting my words. All I'm saying is, you set me up. You wanted me to embarrass myself. You could have told us the truth from the beginning, but instead you... Daniel finally spoke, his voice hoarse. Melissa, stop. She turned to him, incredulous. What? He looked at me then, really looked at me, and the boy I raised flickered through the man he had become. His shoulders sagged further as he said, "She's right. Mom's right. I should have stopped you. I should have spoken up. Instead, I laughed. And that's on me." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The apology wasn't full, wasn't whole, but it cracked something open in me. Still, the wound was deep, and one sentence couldn't heal it. "You hurt me, Daniel," I said softly. My voice trembled, but I didn't care. I could take her words. Lord knows I've taken worse in my life. But watching you, my son, my flesh, laugh while she tore me down, that cut deeper than anything. His eyes filled with tears. He didn't wipe them away, just let them fall. Melissa shifted uncomfortably beside him, her lips pressed thin. "I know," he whispered. "I know I let you down. I don't even know why I did it. Maybe I was trying to keep the peace. Maybe I thought it wasn't that serious, but it was, and I see that now." Melissa scoffed. "Are you serious right now? She's making this bigger than it is. We were just joking around." Daniel turned to her, and for the first time I saw steel in his eyes. It wasn't a joke, Melissa. It was cruelty, and I was part of it. The silence that followed was heavy, stretching thick between us. Melissa's face twisted with anger, her mask of sweetness shattering. She crossed her arms and leaned back, muttering, "Fine, be dramatic. I'm not going to beg." I stood then, my hands trembling, but steady enough to press against the table. "You don't need to beg, Melissa. Respect can't be begged for. It has to be lived. And you've shown me exactly who you are." Her eyes narrowed. "So what, you're going to cut us off? Is that it? Over a misunderstanding?" I looked at Daniel. "That's not a question for me to answer. That's for you, my son. You chose her, and now you'll live with that choice." His face crumpled, torn between love and shame, between loyalty and truth. He didn't answer. Maybe he couldn't. I walked out of that lounge with my head high, but inside, I felt torn apart. I had spoken my truth, but the ache of a mother's love bruised me raw. The staff saw me pass, their eyes soft, some even nodding quietly in encouragement, but nothing could erase the hollowness in my chest. Later that afternoon, I sat on the balcony outside my suite, staring at the ocean. The waves rolled in steady, relentless, like time itself. My heart ached, but the salt air soothed me, reminded me that I had survived worse storms. That's when I heard a knock at the door. It wasn't Daniel. It wasn't Melissa. It was my granddaughter, Jasmine. Just 16, all bright eyes and nervous hands, she stood in the doorway clutching a little notebook. "Grandma, can I sit with you?" I nodded, my throat tight. She slipped out on the balcony and sat beside me. For a while, we didn't speak. We just listened to the waves. Finally, she turned to me. I heard what happened. Dad and Mom, they fight a lot. But I wanted to say, I see you. I've always seen you. Even when they make jokes, even when they act like you don't matter. You matter to me. Tears blurred my vision. I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. Oh, baby, you don't know what that means to me. She smiled shyly, then opened her notebook. I write poems sometimes. This one's for you. Her voice was shaky at first, but it grew steadier as she read. It was about strength, about roots buried deep, about a tree that bent but never broke, a tree that gave shade and shelter, even when people carved their names into its bark. By the time she finished, I was crying openly, my chest heaving with the release of years of quiet pain. I pulled her into my arms and held her tight. In that moment, I knew something important. Melissa's cruelty, Daniel's silence, those things had scarred me, yes. But Jasmine's love, her recognition, her voice lifted in truth, that was the solve. That was the healing I needed. I whispered into her hair, "You will never have to wonder if I see you. I will always see you. Always." And as the sun set over the ocean, casting the sky in shades of gold and fire, I felt a strange peace settle into me. The battle wasn't over. Melissa would not change overnight, and Daniel's guilt would weigh heavy for a long time. But something had shifted. The truth had been spoken, and the next generation, my Jasmine, had chosen to see me, not as a burden or a joke, but as the woman I truly was. And that, more than anything, was my victory. If you've been following Dorothy's journey and this chapter hit you in the heart, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and hit that bell icon so you don't miss the next chapter. And I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop it in the comments below.